Welcome to Community Insight. My name is the Reverend Bob Hudak. I'm an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of East Carolina and a member of the Interfaith Clergy standing for the community. And I am the host today, delighted to have Chaplain Linda Moore from Vidant Medical Center with us to talk about something that affects so many within our families. And for those of us in Pitt, Martin, and Beaufort counties, there are those in our viewing, listening audience for whom a blue Christmas is a very real reality. And for those of us that have been involved in pastoral care for many years, we are especially sensitive to some of the issues that folks face in this season. So I'm going to ask Chaplain Linda Moore to introduce herself and for us to kind of jump right into our theme for this session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bob. It's so good to be here today. I am staff chaplain at Vidant Medical Center. I cover the areas of trauma, emergency department, and neuroscience critical care. I've been here in Greenville for 5.5 years as a chaplain and serve in the pastoral care role here within the community.
And Linda, we were talking earlier in your role within the setting of an epicenter for healing.
Yes.
As Vidant is for, is it 28 or 29 counties now? I lose track of
we're actually
numbers.
Up to 31 counties that we cover.
31 counties in eastern North Carolina are covered. And as one who has spent most of his life in parishes, serving congregations, I remember my very first Christmas Eve when I came with my family to Greenville 13 years ago to begin a ministry at a church in Greenville. And I was on my way to the first of the Christmas Eve services when I had received a phone call to see not one, but two members who were in the hospital, one in critical care. And the emotions that we face as pastoral caregivers of being present to people in such a high energy, very emotional time that the holidays stir within us, and to be present for those that are facing fear of illness, fear of death, families that had all these plans for Christmas and they get changed. Can we talk a little bit about what does that mean for some of what you and those of your colleagues in pastoral care face in the hospital?
Sure. Up until this year, I have worked actually at Vidant every Christmas Day and Christmas Eve. And it's a humbling experience. It's a very special experience because, as you can imagine, there are many patients there and families who were not planning on being in the hospital for Christmas and for any of the holidays, Thanksgiving that just passed, and to be there and to be present with the staff, and it always brings a special spirit for us because we need that spirit to be there for them because they did not plan to be there, depending on whether it's a disease or a trauma that happened. And it does bring on this darkness of sorts because there's some uncertainty from within the hospital and without. During the holidays, as I mentioned earlier, I'm with trauma in the emergency department, and the holidays bring the set of emotions to a whole different level, whether you're in the hospital or whether you're not and you're dealing with depression. And we do see patients that come in, people that come in who've attempted to hurt themselves or attempted suicide or overdose because of those feelings. Or they're in the hospital, as you saw as a parish pastor or parish priest, that they are there, don't want to be. It could be cancer, it could be the trauma, it could be just present and trying to find out what's going on and wondering if they'll have another Christmas.
Well, this brings up another area, I think, that has to do with pastoral care, whether it's at Vidant or for those who are in communities of faith, whether Christian or other denominations. As human persons, we face all sorts of experiences, and I think at least in the culture that we live in with Christmas preparations really starting sometime, I've been told, like after Halloween, I guess.
Sometimes before, yes.
And it builds up as we get closer. And I think there's tremendous pressure
Absolutely.
on people, and especially there is still and continues to be this strong consumerism.
Yes.
This expectation, the commercials. I don't generally watch much TV, but I suspect that the commercials are, as they have always been, presenting unreal kinds of pictures of an ideal holiday, and I think it contributes to the bar being so high that for many people that may be struggling, people who are alone,
Absolutely.
loneliness, darkness,
Yes.
depression. Can you speak a little bit to the emotional and psychological parts, whether it's the holiday or not, but especially in this holiday season that we face?
You hit it right on the target. The expectations are unreal, and it gets earlier every single year. Whether it's expectations from your family, from your church community, from your work, so many different parties to attend to,
Right.
so many different events from school to work to church. If it's expectations within your family, when I was little, I remember I had to go to my grandmother's house for Christmas morning, and then my other grandmother's house for Christmas night, and another house after that. And but to go back to the financial piece, or the expectations of having to find gifts for everybody.
Right.
And the perfect present. I know we sometimes we set our own expectations. I have to find the perfect present for this person and this person and so and wondering also, and it's not selfish if you're going to get something back, and wondering what it is. Or in the event where we're in the holidays, I used to think Advent was. I used to be a pastor as well, and Advent was such a remarkable time for us, of the whole anticipation of the wait
Right.
and building up to it, and between the church and between the commercials and the commercialism and all the events, it builds and builds and builds, and then December 26th, it's all over.
That's right.
And for someone who's dealing on an emotional level, whether it's from the loss of a loved one or from their own depression or darkness or heaviness, all that anticipation that brings a roller coaster of emotions and sleepless nights or isolation or not being able to meet the unrealistic expectations, and then punishing yourself for it later on, or feeling guilty about that you got a gift from someone and you didn't have something for them.
Right.
All of that can build and build on top of a cold and dark winter season that comes every winter. The days get shorter and the nights get longer. And if you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, the expectations that come from trying to be happy, but also trying to recognize that there's still a loss. And that.
Yeah, and actually speaking to that, I mean, I just spoke recently with a dear friend whose husband died just within the last month or two, and for whom this particular Christmas is not a time to do the rituals
Right.
that bring so much joy to the season. And it's not because this particular person is so deeply depressed. It's just dealing with grief sometimes is hard to even know that we are in the throes of grief. And grief may not be
Right.
just the death of a loved one. The grieving can be for memories that surface. You know, I know there isn't a Christmas season that comes when I don't find myself transported to childhood and my grandparents and my parents and other family members, aunts and uncles, all of whom now have been transformed into
Right.
a new place, a new life. But it still is very emotional. But if you could speak from your experience currently of just some of the darkness that people face with depression and with some of the other kinds of symptoms that may come from grief and loss.
Right. And an example of your friend who lost their spouse not too long ago, this is their first Christmas of having to come up with new tradition. First, to grieve what the tradition is that they lost because their loved one is no longer there for however many years that they were together. For those who have lost people, whether they are children or whether they're your spouse of 70-some years, this is the first holiday that you won't have that person there.
Right.
And we want so much to recognize, to help and comfort one another that we forget to recognize that. And we forget that we're going to be in that place, not because we don't have our faith, not because we don't have, every person has a soul, every person has a spirit, but they have a new life now. And whether it's to grieve that tradition of whatever that tradition holds. Just the other night, my grandmother who died in 1981, I miss her terribly. We had these special cookies that we made together, and I made those cookies the other night. And it brought back some wonderful memories.
What kind of cookies are they, Linda?
They're the no.
We may be giving some recipes out today.
I'm not a baker per se, so this was a no-bake chocolate oatmeal cookie that you just set up and set together and enjoy throughout the rest of the week, maybe days. But it was fun to do that with her, and it brought some wonderful memories. But I also deal with the loss of my dad, who it wasn't a holiday that he died, but he died on my birthday.
Wow.
And every year, for those who are dealing with that loss, and that was 21 years ago, I have to be intentional about doing something different to be sure I don't go into isolation or I don't get so depressed that I don't learn to celebrate. He would be the first one to say, just as any other family member would, still celebrate in some way. But you feel guilty. And with the depression, whether it's a loss of a loved one or just there are so many people out here with depression, and the holidays just manifest it. Walking through that valley of darkness, and you've got to be intentional. If you're isolating yourself or if you're not sleeping well, learning to know what your limitations are. If you're expected to go do so many different things, but you're exhausted and you're tired of answering the question, how are you doing? Or answering the text messages or the phone calls or trying to comfort everyone else who's trying to comfort you. Even if there wasn't a loss in your family, depression hits hard.
Right.
And there is this loneliness, and you can have 20 family members in the room and still feel like you're alone. This fog over you, and all you want to do is sit and lie in the bed and just wait for December 26th to come, or you want to just get away from everybody. And I have to give permission. I do feel like I need to say it's okay to cry. It's okay to say I've had enough of this. I need a break. To make some time for yourself. To cry.
So I suspect in the world of the hospital, which is really your congregation.
Yes, it is. Yep.
As contrasted with a congregation like I have served and you
Right.
have served previously, I think we learn as pastoral ministers know when to refer, because there are situations where people are lonely, people are depressed, and I think having an opportunity to talk with someone who can truly listen, not just with ears, but with the heart, and especially someone that in listening might be able to just say a few encouraging words where maybe the person doesn't know exactly where to go, but at least knows where to take the next few steps along the way. What kind of advice do you give to folks that you know in the hospital, that are seriously depressed? Because I think while our purpose today isn't to sort of identify, counseling centers or
Right.
places, but I mean to just speak about when the signs say, I really need to pick up the phone, or I need to go see a spiritual leader, maybe even to say, help me, that it's not a sign of weakness.
No, absolutely
It could
not.
be a sign of strength to be able to say, I need help. I'm having a hard time in this holiday season. We see those who are not in the flow of "'tis the season to be jolly" is sometimes, that there's something really wrong. And maybe what is really right is that something that has been deep inside starts bubbling up in
Right.
this holiday
Yeah.
season, saying, I need help, pay attention. I want to live in the spirit of the birth of the one we celebrate in Christmas, the Prince of Peace. I want to know that peace, and I want to be a sign of that peace for my family, for my neighbors, for the world in which I live. But what would be some
Yes, yeah.
traits or characteristics that you in the world of your colleagues and chaplains talk about and face?
Well, a couple of things I surely do tell my patients and my families. I am not a licensed counselor. I can be there and be a listening presence, but I can also provide what I call a ministry of introduction, and letting them know that if you are with a faith community, they may have the pastor there who can provide some counseling for you or refer out to. I know there are some great counseling centers here in town and in the surrounding counties that can provide counseling even at a scaled price. I also remind folks to reach out to one another. In our Christian faith, I remind them, especially of the birth of Jesus, that when Jesus became an adult, he actually needed 12 people to help him. We are not built to handle anything on our own. We're not meant to. No matter what your faith is, we are reminded that we're not built to handle anything alone. And not just Jesus. I tease and say, Adam needed help, so God created Eve to help him out. And same thing with our faith communities. And to help let go of the stigma that we're not supposed to ask for help. We're not supposed to go to counseling. I go to counseling once a month. I deal with such hard issues at the hospital. I need a place where I can go.
Right.
And it does impact it impacts me. I know it impacts my colleagues of what we face day in and day out. We have to have a place to go to. Doesn't mean I don't have my faith. It does not mean that my faith is weak. It means that I recognize that I need to have someone with the heart and with the listening and with the support and with the knowledge to push me when I need to be pushed and help myself. Going back to that intentionality of you've got to be intentional by getting up and going outside or turning the lights on or opening the shades in your home when you might want it to be completely dark.
Right. So for you, Chaplain Linda from Vidant Medical Center, and for me as one who has been a pastor serving churches, we know how important it is to seek counseling. And hearing you share that you do go for
Yes.
counseling. And I have, through the years, over the past 45 years or so since I was first ordained a priest, have gone for various forms of therapy and counseling, and it is so important, and it
Right.
surprises me that even in the world in which we live today, that it's seen as somebody who has problems or
Yeah.
someone that can't take care of themselves, and it's really a myth about that because we need one another. And I know that without the kind of professional support that therapy and counseling offers, and not just at a season like this,
Right. Absolutely.
but all the time, can make all the difference in the true meaning and spirit of Christmas coming alive. Because I think, without going into a religious, theological, we celebrate that the Word became flesh for those of us in the Christian tradition. And for me, it embraces all humanity, because what it really says is that no matter what our beliefs in our head, I see faith as a trusting vulnerability in a God who loves us, and a God who loves us with an unconditional love that
Right.
was shown in the helpless vulnerability of a baby. And it just continues to speak to the mystery and the gift of life. And that's really what it's about. So I think we have some time left in looking at this. And
Right.
I know there was years ago when I was a young priest. That seems like forever. I remember speaking of gifts and gift giving. That's so important at Christmas. But really, the best gifts that we can give, the gift of listening, the gift of truly being with people that we can give our time to. I have found the joy that comes from just knowing an elderly neighbor who may even live alone can
Yes.
get one out of their whatever it is that feels stuck. But the joy of just even baking. You talked about baking. I started the custom some years ago of finding time, and I've got more time to do it now in this new season of my life, that to bake. I don't bake, but I bake around Christmas. My mother and grandmother's nut roll, which comes from Eastern Europe, an ethnic
Right.
Slovak tradition. And I get such joy out of it because I feel the presence of my mother and grandmother,
Isn't it?
who have been
Yes.
deceased many years, but they continue to be with us when we are able to kind of look from a different perspective at the true meaning of what this season is. And
Yeah.
so, what are some of the gifts? What other gifts in terms of time and maybe
Right.
listening?
the gift, a dear friend of mine reminded me recently, in the midst of all the expectations, the greatest gift, like the listening or to be present, is a gift of simplicity. And to be with maybe that elderly person who's at home alone, or going to visit them if they're in a nursing home or a skilled nursing facility, knowing if you have friends who are not near family, reach out to them and say, hey, why don't you, there have been a couple of Christmases that I could not go home for Christmas. And a friend reached out to me, and I reached out to them, and I spent Christmas with them. And I have a new family because of it. I still have my family, but I now have a new tradition as well. Volunteering, going to volunteering at homeless shelters or soup kitchens, or if you're a pet person, volunteering at the pet shelter, or to take in a pet during the holidays for fostering. The different things like the baking piece,
Right.
baking for your neighbor, or just putting together some snacks or candy to take to your neighbor or to a friend, or to that person who you think might be alone. Or even if you are the one that is alone, reaching out to other people. That's something that's very difficult to do for someone who might be alone, is to have the courage to reach out to others
Right.
and to be close to your friends. And that's a gift that lasts a lifetime.
It does.
Your toy car is going to break, or the watch that you're given is going to lose its battery at some point. But to have that presence and that relationship and that support, which we're all meant to have in the midst of our faith or our soul and our spirit, that connection, that community, that gift of simplicity and time, of listening and support.
Well, and when that happens, it makes a deep impression.
It does, very much.
During the months after 9/11, when I served a church in Georgia, our congregation said we knew so little about Islam. And
Yes.
there just happened to be a mosque in the town in Georgia, south of the airport, Atlanta airport. And I nervously made a phone call, began a conversation, a relationship began, and we actually got to know people. And one of the lasting memories of hospitality that sticks in my memory, and I remember every Christmas, as I am right now in these days, is the Christmas Eve after the first service, before the late night service. There was very few people around, and a woman who was the head of the Islamic Speakers Bureau, Samaya Khalifa, comes to the church with a platter of pastries, baklava, just to say Merry Christmas. It wasn't to a particular person, it was to a community.
Right.
And so I think there are ways that you may be able to speak about how are there volunteer opportunities at the hospital that I know you've been working on Christmas Day for the last few years? Might there be some ways that people can even seek opportunities to volunteer?
Yes, actually, you can. You're more than welcome to contact the hospital volunteer services, and they have a Jennifer Congleton is the administrator for that, and they set up from high school students to retired professors and all ages in between, and all life and outcomes, and all come to volunteer at the hospital. You go through a process to training and to learn the hospital ins and outs, and to find where you feel led, and to use our language, called to, whether it's to help transport patients from one room to another or to visit. We've got, I've seen music therapists come and play music, and you can go through the volunteer services. And
so
do that.
just calling the volunteer services at the hospital.
Right.
Well, thank you, Chaplain Linda Moore from Vidant Medical Center. We've come to the conclusion of our time today, and I'd like to end with a quote that comes, used to be on Christmas cards, but it really comes from a spiritual leader and a mentor of a young man called Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor, Dr. Howard Thurman, said the following, and you may be familiar with this, and it really speaks to our being here today with this theme, that when the song of the angel is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to build the nations, to bring peace among people, to make music in our hearts. We wish you a blessed and peace-filled Christmas.